Hello, and welcome to the 38th Radical Poetry Reading. I'm Malvika Jolly, Special Projects Associate here at The Rail, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming poet and playwright Malcolm Tariq, who has curated a fantastic lineup of poets and readers for us today, featuring Mary Moore Easter, Yolanda Jay Franklin, Koya Fagin Maples, and Courtney Faye Taylor. And first off, we've started all of our events here at the Brooklyn Rail with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're located on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And I will say the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all who struggle for freedom, in recognition that when it comes to our liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. In that spirit, I encourage you to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions as we do our part in undoing these legacies of injustice. We'll drop that shortly. And now it's my honor to welcome our wonderful curator, poet, and playwright, Malcolm Tariq. He's the author of Heed the Hollow, which came out with Graywolf in 2019 and was the winner of the 2018 Cave Canem Poetry Prize the previous year. He was also the winner of the 2019 George Author of the Year Award. A graduate of Emory, Malcolm holds a PhD in English from the University of Michigan, and he lives in Brooklyn, New York, where he is the Programs and Communications Manager of our friends over at Cave Canem, a home for Black poetry. Malcolm, take it away.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Malvika, for inviting me to curate this event. I think this is a wonderful series to have during the pandemic, and it's such an intimate space when we can't gather. Well, I think soon we'll be able to gather in person, but yeah, I'm just really appreciative of the opportunity to gather these wonderful poets that I've been reading, some very recently and some for years, some I've known personally before. So just really thankful. So I'm going to talk a bit about just curating the event, and then I may read a poem of my own before I just hand it over to the poets. So when I was asked to curate for this session, there was a few directions that I was thinking about going in. I think because we're so close to June, I was thinking about Southern Black queer poets. But then I decided to just go with things that I've been thinking about recently, poems I've been reading, and topics that I've been trying to explore in my own writing. And so today's reading features poets who resist erasure by documenting the lives of Black women and girls, which I'll explain a bit about in between introducing the readers. Though I would say that some of these poets are employing a documentary poetics, I don't want to place that label on their work myself. But what I've been captivated by for a long time is how women writers in particular use poetry as a form of history making and documenting, particularly how Black women writers recognize the need for this. And of course, we can just go to Audre Lorde and her proclamation that poetry is not a luxury, and how we use poetry as a very political act, especially for Black people. And this is not a tradition, it's not a new tradition. One could say that Gwendolyn Brooks's entire project over the course of her life, which spans several decades, is documenting. And so those are just two people that I want to bring into the room, Gwendolyn Brooks and Audre Lorde. And with Audre Lorde, just wanting to say that thinking about erasure, especially over the past 2 weeks, and what's been happening in Palestine, and the need for us to really educate ourselves on international issues and how they affect our own lives and connection to liberation and to history, and how easy it is for things to get erased and for narratives to be reformulated. So I do just want to acknowledge that even within this space, thinking about liberation for Palestine and what the written word can do for that, and just the poets that I've been reading lately. So thank you all for being here and for interacting with this space. And please do just use this time, I would say, to think about how erasure and documenting really are present in your own individual lives and in your family histories and other areas of your life. I would say. So I think I'm gonna leave it at that, so we can just get to the poets. And so I'm gonna read, I feel like I'm forgetting to say something, but I'm gonna read one of my own poems that, where is it? Okay, so this is, I think this is a nice way to connect everyone. So I'm gonna read a poem from my book, Heed the Hollow, and it's called Grandma's Black Bottom. There's a lot of poems in the book, Heed the Hollow, that are, I think I have 3 poems that are Malcolm Tariq's Black Bottom, but this one is about my grandma, and thinking about the Black Bottom, the dance, and liberation, control, and trauma and personal histories. So Grandma's Black Bottom. And this is from, I think I was doing some type of project with some friends, and I interviewed my grandmother for this. So I have a recording of her. She's still alive, but I have a recording of her like speaking to me, which is, I realized how much of a privilege and honor that is to have while she's still here. So Grandma's Black Bottom. When I position the recorder, she straightens into narrative, every inch of lived detail gone asunder. She leans forward, looking back. I attend inquiry as I've done for years, converging on craft. What she refuses to say haunts this entire process of returning. Together we construct memory. This the bottom, she says, indicating this porch, this street, this same spot that born her mother, shaped me, my mother and her, billowing in the same place for nearly a century, that claimed us, cost us our lives, where we make our living our business. What we don't say is divided as communion. It creeps along the edge of the storied. And though I hunger for testimony, I have learned to listen and ask later for what will never come. What lingers in her request to not talk about her childhood. She still remembers to forget that. Everyone wants the strong Black woman with Sunday greens. No one wants to hear about the dirt she washed from them, the strain that went into the pot used in defense. Everyone wants the Black woman, loud-mouthed and big, but no one wants to live in her loud-spaced silence narratives, the dissonance dancing between them. Everyone wants pot liquor, but no one wants to cleave leaf from stem, to salt the earth, to dig into dirt towards the deep root. Silence is testimony. I take that as daily bread when she says, I didn't say anything for a long time. This is hard to imagine. For years, we slid along walls and waited out the shrill profane of Grandma's Black Bottom, her device against control. Perhaps this is the lesson, to say what I have to when I don't have to listen to what I'm told. I am this obedient a grandson, listening and listening and listening. To who else do I owe that much? We long for stories we aren't prepared to carry. Foolish of me, learned Negro, to feign scholarly with this conscious backwardness. Grandma speaks into the air waxed on repeat, her eyes on my steady moving pen, my forward glance. I forgot to say that if you know my grandma's a Scorpio, and you know, there's a fire to her that being so open with her emotions and her anger throughout my life, it was surprising to learn that for a long time she wasn't that way. And there were some things that happened that encouraged that. But so that's Grandma's Black Bottom. Thank you all for listening. I'm gonna turn it over to Mary Moore Easter. So I discovered Mary's work recently with the publication of her chapbook, Free Papers, which charts her own personal ancestry beside what's known of Eliza Winston, an enslaved woman who escaped from Mississippi to Minnesota. And even before I got to those poems, I understood so much about Mary's work as a poet from what I found online. It's rich in detail, history, and witnessing. I'm gonna drop, is there a chat? Okay, there it is. I'm gonna drop this link for anyone who's interested to Mary's poem, Terracotta Crown. And there's a recording to it as well. I was just listening to it again. Such a rich poem, and just also thinking about what I said earlier about Palestine really came through when I was returning to that poem today. So Easter is also the author of 3 other books of poetry, The Body of the World, which was a Minnesota Book Award and Poetry Finalist in 2019, Walking from Origins, and From the Flutes of Our Bones. She founded and directed Carleton College's dance program and is a Cave Canem fellow. Please welcome Mary Moore Easter.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. It is my pleasure to be nestled with you in this cohort of Black women poets for the next hour. I am very appreciative, and I'm going to get right to the poems. Where is her story? Where is her story? Anna Maori was born a slave, my great grandmother. Providence let me hold this object of hers in my hands, the water pitcher. Great grandma Anna held this handle, put her palm print on its surface every time she poured water, milk, or lemonade for children who would spawn me down the line. She kept the cut glass shining, washed and polished, dried and wrapped against the harm that goes with having glass at hand in bondage times. My mother called her grandma, and my grandma called her mother. Centuries spill their drops from vessels, trickle, channel, river, sea. Eliza Winston was born a slave. Where is her story? Where is her story? Black ancestry is a dominant theme in my work, danced, written, or sung. I'm reading today from my new chapbook, and I'm going to give you the whole title because I tried to get everything in there so people would know what it was about, even though it's a short book. It's free papers, inspired by the testimony of Eliza Winston, a Mississippi slave escaped to freedom in Minnesota in 1860. I discovered Eliza when I was in trouble. The poem Request for Help describes the moment in this excerpt. The universe, known to be indifferent when inflicting pain, the universe poured forth mercy on me in Black abundance. Eliza is my gift to you. Eliza's trembling heart is my gift for you. Eliza's risk is my gift for you. Eliza's courage is my gift for you. Eliza's open eye is my gift to you. And then I spoke directly to her in my extremity. There you were, Eliza, gold from God in plain sight. No one had picked you up, wiped the muck from the landscape of your face. Gold, I tell you, left for me to find, to polish. I won't say to own. We've had enough of that. I'm no colonizer of your shores, no conqueror to whom you must submit. Rather, a mirror that reflects what it sees, the you that was me, the background that was your time, the spaces surrounding you where I'd rummage and find my own things. Only grace could have offered this circumstance to me, the overlooked coin of the realm, a prize for the one who picks it up, recognizes a value previously unimagined. I feel anointed by the discovery of you, a realm at the beck and call of all that is fertile in me. my feet untethered to walk your fields, climb the mountains, embossed under the black of your golden face. The old folks would shout, "Do, Jesus." In her escape, in her preparation, Eliza had friends who kept the secret of her escape plans. They struggled with what we imagined the weather to be in Minnesota. That's like everybody who tries to come here, they struggled with what it was going to be like while they made her wardrobe. This poem is called "Those Who Made 2 Years Worth of Her Clothes Tell About It." First woman. He'd tell the land would be white in winter. He'd tell the white would be soft as cotton with thorns of ice, not growing from the ground, but falling from the sky. He'd tell what she gonna need for a body used to heat. I'll make a secret round my waist of mistress ripped pantaloons, stolen honey cover, smuggled down the slave line, ripped at will. She won't miss its rent unmended. Plenty more where that come from. Second woman. As long as these old fingers hold a thimble, you will not tremble in whatever cold they have for you, Eliza. You are not motherless without cover in your solitude. Take with you this vest with sleeves stitched and doubled, cotton stuffed, these skirts and sack shirts closed with pilfered buttons, tagged with bits of cut off ribbon to remind your joy to rise inside your obedient face, your fire to blaze inside whatever cold they have for you. Take us with you in each fold and pleat, armored by the freedom that you seek. Another man done gone, another man done gone, another man done gone. Up the river, way up from Shiloh Plantation, Mississippi to St. Anthony Falls, Minnesota. In droves they came. They left the heat behind, the Mississippi musk and heavy air. A change of scene would do them good. The falls and water rushing free in foam. They took their comforts with them. Cook, who kept the South inside their mouths. Slave who'd sleep on floor outside their door, waked at any whim or need. The hand that held the sickly head and kept the children out of mind. That hefted, smoothed, and scurried, dark as nighttime in the day. Invisible, a nothing to imagine with a plan. Eliza came, was brought along to hold the sickly head. She left the bondage of her home behind, left friends who knew her leaving was for good and kept her plan for freedom sealed. Left musk and heavy air and duties owned by those whose promises betrayed her trust. She did her very best, a comfort to herself. Her standard steady over churning water, her forward motion out of sight beneath the flashing surface of the paddle boat. She smoothed and scurried, closely confined by minutes, days, hours, nights, waiting to alight on land, free land. In her travels, abolitionists arranged to take Eliza's case to court so that she could not be reclaimed into slavery when she was declared free. I have to tell you, I'm so tempted to read you the entire book, but I have a time limit, so I'm going to end with this poem called what comes now. Lord, I'm out here on your word, a plea. Each time she was set to hide in the wood, waiting for rescue to find her. Lord, I'm out here on your word, a reminder of promises, a compact for faith met with courage inside risk, words forced from her lips by uncertainty, borrowed from others who looked for hope in despair while she bided her time alone. No way she knew to say, I celebrate myself, and yet she did. She could not say what hadn't been written yet. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. She took her one hand, holding tight her other hand, and set out, not without regret, in clear pursuit of what most thought she couldn't win and didn't deserve to get. Hers was the year Clotilde, the last slave ship, sneaked into anchor and was set afire to hide the crime, disgorging 100 Africans onto land where they met the very bondage she would not accept. She could not see 6 months ahead, a nation split, half willing to forget the principles that bound them, half standing up to pay a debt to stolen men and women. She did not know the details of the world that swirled around her world. She took off anyway. On the roiling surface of the wet river, her deed stretching out in unseen time and space. Thank you so much. There's more in the book. Thank you, Malcolm.
Wow, thank you so much, Mary. That was such a rich reading, but also storytelling. I love the song and how you introduced it. I was just leaning into the whole experience. Masterclass in reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna continue next with Yolanda Franklin. So Yolanda, I met Yolanda at Cave Canem, the Cave Canem retreat in 2016, and I immediately learned that it was impossible not to love the light that she carries and shares with everyone who's around her. I was at Cave Canem that first year. I didn't know anyone. I wrote by myself for a very long time. And so going into this space where there were like 40 other poets who I did not know. And if you know artists, there are egos involved, there's anxious energy, there's just a lot happening. And I'm a Pisces, so I was very quiet. And the time came for me to read at the public reading, the community reading, and they called my name to come to the podium. And a lot of people were like, oh, who's that? And Yolanda turned around and said, oh, he's over here. And I had no idea that Yolanda knew who I was. But that just says a lot about how she sees people and cares for people, but it's also a very accepting person. And I remember standing up at the podium and reading, and she was like standing up, cheering me on as I was reading this poem. And that's just my favorite memory about Yolanda. So I was, also I should say that, so more than who she is as a person, it's who she is as a poet. So at the retreat, she also did a craft talk on Robin Cost Lewis's Voyage of the Sable Venus. And so she introduced me to that book, which is also a documentary poetics project about Black women in arts. It spans centuries. And so she gave a craft talk on that and introduced me to that work. So of course I thought about Yolanda for this reading. And from reading just the first few poems in her book, Blood Vinyls, you know that you're in the company of a Southern writer who carries Florida in everything she does. So it was not surprising to learn that she is a third generation Floridian who was born in Tallahassee. So that's all I'll say about Yolanda for now. I'll also mention that she's a 4-time Fulbright Scholar Award finalist. She's a Cave Canem Fellow, Callaloo Fellow, and a Vona Fellow. Also at Cave, she knew so many people at Cave Canem and had the most youthful energy out of all of us. I just really love it. She's a two-time recipient of the J.M. Shaw Academy of American Poets Award, and she collects original press vinyl and can be found at her favorite coffee shop, Square Mug Cafe in Railroad Square, enjoying a drink the barista's name after her. Also not surprising. Please welcome Yolanda Jay Franklin.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. My background is at my best friend's house. It's the first time I've gotten a chance to stay with her with the pandemic. So you may also hear puppies in the background. So if you would just be patient with me. Thank you so much for having me, and what an honor it is to read with the women and Malcolm in this lineup. I am going to read a few poems from my first collection of poems, Blood Vinyls, which is shaped like an LP, and I have paper hanging out because I'm also going to situate a couple new poems that I'm going to read in the projects that I'm also currently working on. Florida Coven. Not sure I'm strong enough to cast a spell, but Marie Laveau entrusts her to wear the crown of power. Seance, gumbo, etouffee, and a blanket of snakeskin to Zora. A Florida girl too, drenched in light, baptized by Gulf tides, a conjurer who can make a man come home and recipe Grigri to rule the man you love. So no surprise, there are no real borders in the play Fences, yet it usurps female runes from Tallahassee, my birthplace. The lineage of Florida women grow chicory roots. So no surprise, Angela Bassett's cast as Marie Laveau reconjures the ancestral narrative of our American horror story. So then I am a conduit mulatto, one of the first skeleton keys created by a Bayesian blacksmith with Cherokee brows, a Florida gal from a coven, women grown right up out the ground with hips as wide as the Okeechobee. So no surprise, every man I've loved falls entranced, still ponders what it means to miss Tallahassee. All right, see if I can stop some of this rough one. And as Malcolm said, we, the women in this lineup, we document white room syndrome. Epigraph. After the poet Kenneth Goldsmith read the St. Louis County autopsy report of Michael Brown, the teenager killed by police in Ferguson, as a poem at the Interrupt 3 conference at Brown University in March 2015. Preamble. White room syndrome is the white piece of paper facing the author, or a clear and common sign of the failure of the author's imagination. 1. Habeas corpus. Isn't an autopsy report always a eulogy? Especially when the autopsy of a Black body is read aloud for unpoetic effect to indifferent white academics attending a poetry reading on an Ivy League campus, and the genitalia of a Black body is still the last line. When a white male poet performs as medical examiner and slave owner at an auction block, does the audience become the body? 2. Forensic report. An autopsy report is almost never read as a eulogy. It is always the salt that wakes the dead in hopes of scaring away the funeral. I clenched my Uncle Sonny's hand because my body hung over the edge during my cousin Sean's funeral. A trail of salt ruined my makeup. I tried not to get snot on his hand. I can still hear my aunt's distress from the loss of her only son while dressing his only daughter for his funeral. When these audience members were interviewed, did they have stories that they need interpreters for? Or maybe the seats were just rows and rows and empty rows of coffins. 3. Eating the other. Does the eulogy become ekphrastic or something like a resurrection? Perhaps we should imagine the catalog of the Library of Congress's transcripts of the live tweets. I can hear Julius Fusik's entry of the gladiators over another impossible culpability. Call it poetry, work, art, avant-garde, uncreative, neo-racism, or necromancy. They will take the body again and again and again and again. Okay, I'm going to just read 2 more poems from Blood Vinyls. And these 2 poems are important to me because I read these 2 poems my last year at Cave Canem when I first met Malcolm. And in honor of Toy Derricott and the 25th anniversary of Cave Canem, I think I'm getting closer to writing the hard poems that Toy Derricott pushes us to do. Truth be told. 1. Mother, I'm waiting for you to die, so I can tell the story about how on the night my husband tried to kill me. I called to tell you this would happen. My husband, the gun, the rape, the gun, the dream I had the night before under the ceiling fan, a metronome of doom, like the single sound of a turnstile playing What's Love Got to Do with It on repeat. I repeat, help me make it through the night. And you ignored my premonition while we were held hostage in that house on a 4-way stop. 2. All I could remember were the Sundays you and Daddy played Tina like the secular prey, let's stay together. But my husband, and your grandkids, and I drove by that house today on the corner of that 4-way stop. On the corner of that 4-way stop I left that corner of the 4-way stop, and now I know you had to know how love, it takes a fool to learn how love don't love. Now I am a deck full of queens, centuries whose steel claw better be good to me. And no, I know you still believe that I deserve this soundtrack I live, but didn't I make you the most beautiful consequences of love? Bop, autobiography of a jukebox. The title is an allusion to a collection by Cornelius Eady, or 5 Ways to Kill a Gardenia. Daddy never beat me like Mama did. She made me bend between my engorged breast and pregnant belly over the tub edge to scrub porcelain white as a wedding dress she said I ain't never gonna be able to wear anyway. Saturday mornings, I removed the ring of sin, made it a virgin again, beat back nausea and silt. I kilt myself into exact, prepped folds of cotton, white cloth with Ajax, same way Gamma donned domestic work like reluctant prayer. I used to be your sweet mama, but now I'm just as sour as can be. Mama got demons in spades, used daddy's black leather belt, one he wore wherever he took me. Guess it was pride, or maybe just her version of backhanded. It ain't easy to admit the blues is a woman, a supernatural something who carries a clutch of penance and provocation. In bravado, maybe Mama would tell me if she could about life without my father, offer more than a folder full of 40-year-old newspaper clippings with dog ears bent like the edges of Bessie's blue notes. Mama tucked her jealousy behind her ear like a gardenia, too. Yes, I'm mad and have a right to be after what your daddy did to me. Mama folded to her knees when her only daughter arched her back in the secular name of love, like Janie Crawford beneath a pear tree, her eyes watching God and a dust-bearing bee sink into sanctums of blooms instead of some pulpit and pews to line chastity's hymn. Perhaps the blues is a good woman, quiet as it's kept, under siege in service of myth, to sharpen love in a nice dry house. Perhaps I just can't imagine how Mama had to bend into an instrument never meant to carry her tune. I used to be your sweet Mama, sweet Papa, but now I'm just as sour as can be. Okay, those are the last two poems in Blood Vinyls. And I am going to wrap us up with two more poems. They are new works. This is a poem that I wish was ready to be in Blood Vinyls. It has a similar theme with a lot of the poems that deal with the coming of age of what it means to be a woman and a girl and a Black girl that looks like me being raised in the South. Because my name means violet. I fought a 10-year-old boy who called me a bitch at Jake Gaither Park because I told him. No, because I warned him not to. I sat on his chest, blew out all of his birthday candles with each fist to his face. Now, somewhere in Tallahassee, a 40-year-old man is trying to forget he got his ass kicked by a girl at his own birthday party. Please be patient with me. I'm putting my finger on the problem. Once I tackled a boy to the ground in Mrs. McKinney's yard, the 70-year-old woman who babysat us after Pineview Elementary let out. I hope you still like me when I say I stuck my tongue down his throat, just to say I French kissed someone, anyone. Please be patient with me. I'm putting my finger on the problem. At 19, I put a knife to Junebug's neck, my ex-husband's 300-pound narcoleptic cousin, who slept on our couch until his mouth fired. Bitches don't fix a man his plate no more. The problem seems pleased when it thinks its patient is me. The next year, I fought a .22 caliber rifle and shoved a shell in its chamber after my 17-year-old brother-in-law hurled bitch at me over dirty dishes. Butt and barrel to his back, I warned him my daddy always called me shotgun shorty. I keep cocking and recocking. I keep putting my finger on the problem. I fought my ex-husband, extra rounds, no gloves, no corners, bare-knuckled, before he raped me. I convinced him to use a condom and kept his semen for evidence. Before he ripped the rotary phone out of the wall. Then he brandished a 32 to protect himself. I watched a duel of doves patronize the power line when they only gave him 30 days in county and 2 years probation. The problem keeps putting its finger on me. My first year as a teacher, I fought a phys ed track and field football coach, a coworker who parked his F-150 perpendicular to my Civic. He swore the 7-year itch made him do it. The problem is pleased when it thinks its patient is me. A few years later, I pulled a knife on a boyfriend who refused to pay rent and who refused to move out after he unscrewed each bathroom light bulb at 5 a.m. I learned to dress for work in the dark. Damn, I think the problem keeps putting its finger on me. At 40, I fight the ex-Navy SEAL truck driver who sleeps in combat with me, elbows the back of my head while I sleep. Brain mapping results say a litany of concussions caused strokes to bouquet like red sugar skulls in my circle of Willis. I keep cocking and recocking. The problem keeps putting its finger on me. Thank you. I'm going to read the last poem, which is documenting a history, and I'm going to make my screen go black so that you can still hear me. Okay. All right. I am scrolling to share my screen. Of course, I had it all set up, and then, of course, retrograde, as Malcolm said. Here we go. Matrilineal sonnet for my omitted origins and justifiable future. The Black Griot woman would love to say where her bloodline began, name Zora or in reverence Marie Laveau, and articulate it began with magical cannons, conjurers, and queens. Griot culinarians and clairvoyants who enchant storms, undim oubliettes and maroon ports. This act is evidence of how writing recovers. My instincts say Tituba is Bayesian, not Amerindian, calls Indian town home, keen and merino skinned, she's always known her power extraordinary. Our mother Isis invented the art of it, magic. Her sage resolve became a benevolent choreography when she set in search of Osiris's 14 body parts pitched all over Egypt, found them under a tamarisk tree. What do you call a queen who does not recognize her own matrilineal majesty? She conjures his bones, performs necromancy before the perils of practice. She meant, I am that which was and is and will ever be, and no mortal has yet lifted the veil which covers me. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Yolanda. Every time you read Truth Be Told, that first line just always just takes everything out of me. So yeah, just thank you for being so generous with your work and that poem. Please be patient with me. I'm putting my finger on the prop. I had to write that line down. That's truly some magic happening. Thank you. So yeah, we'll continue to talk about that offline. Next is, I have to get my screen back up. Okay, so our next reader is Koya Fagan Maples, and I learned about Koya's work right before her book, I had it, oh, right before Men came out. I don't even know what year that, probably 2018. Yes, because it was my first season in New York City, and I learned what it was about and kept the tab open on my computer for publication date. So it's like, I have to get this as soon as it drops. And then later I learned I could have just pre-ordered it and not had that tab open. But yeah, I ordered it and went and got it, and I just read it over and over. I recommended it to people. It was the first time, and I'm sure Koya will say more about this, but it's the first time I learned about James Marion Sims and about Black women and his gynecology research and whatnot. I think there is, I should have looked this up. I think his statue is still somewhere in New York City near Central Park, which I also learned from this book. And then going into research about who he was, this book sent me down a spiral. And for a while it stayed next to my bed because I just kept reading it over and over. It's a beautiful blossoming of history, and then it goes into some personal poems. So she was one of the first people I thought about when I had this topic, just because Men stays on that list of books that I go back to in terms of structure and documenting the lives of Black women and some research projects that I'm working on. So really honored that Koya could be here. And I heard her read from it in New York City, maybe like a year after it was published, and I got to experience the poems on a different level. I just remember that was such a great reading in New York, and just hearing her read straight through the book. So yeah, really excited to have Koya. Koya is from Charleston, South Carolina. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Alabama and has received fellowships from Cave Canem and the Alabama State Council on the Arts. She'll say more about MEND, but it was a finalist for the 2019 Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Poetry, and this is a word I don't know how to say, Housatonic Book Award for Poetry, and it tells the story of the birth of obstetrics and gynecology in America and the role enslaved Black women played in that process. She teaches, oh, I'm learning they removed the statue. Yes, okay, I do remember some news about that. She teaches in the MFA program for creative writing at the University of Alabama, home of the Black Warrior Review. Please welcome Koya Fagan Maples.
Hello. I feel so privileged to be here, and just to be hearing this work is just like is so moving, so incredible, you know. And yeah, it's hard for me to kind of I can't move forward without just acknowledging all of your work, and yeah, thank you for that. So Malcolm talked a bit about MEND, but MEND is a collection of historical persona poetry that is written in the voices of Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, and the unnamed women who were, experimental subjects, or considered experimental subjects, by Dr. James Marion Sims of Mount Meigs, Alabama. So over a period of 4 years, Dr. Sims performed these experiments without anesthesia, and really without the explicit consent of these women. And so I wanted to write poems that were in their voices, that told their version, what could have been their version of events. And so I spent a lot of time listening out for the voices. One way that I went about this project was by separating the research from the writing. That was the best thing that I could have done for me. Otherwise, it would have been too bogged down in research. So for 1 year, I collected all my texts, and then, I completely took some time away from that. And then I started in on the real writing of the project. So I just wanted to share that. So I'll just share just a couple poems from MEND today, and then also the current poems from my current manuscript. All right. So these, the first poems that I'm going to share are from a sonnet corona that I wrote in the book. This is from an 11-part, sonnet corona in the book. It's called What Yields. All right. Not going to read all 11 parts today, just a couple. And this poem is written in the voice of Anarcha, and she's confronting the doctor in these series of poems. For bodies above virtue are never black. Sprawling dewberries grow along your fence. Since most days we are hungry, we take them, fill sacks we hide against our hips. When each bite unravels in our mouths, we imagine a sweeter history and more hope than you could ever allow. Desperate, we gorge on dewberries. The heady berries in our molars' slow grinding drown out the distant cries of thief. Crushed berry over berry over berry, this joy, the closest thing to love. Sated, we hide the blue-stained sacks again. Our eyes blink back the river to be lost in. Your eyes blink back the river to be lost in. You clutch your elbows, pacing the sick room, walled with basswood, 11 beds sinking like monuments into a red clay floor. Our bodies taut in their sheets, locked in place, calculating your restraint. We keep our breath, waiting. Then you begin your complaint. We aren't trying to heal. Unchecked urine in our wet beds instead of the waste pail. Piss compromises the stitches and we know it. And how many times must you tell us to lie still? You leave us. There will be no dosage today. The held cries lift. First, you'd have to consider us women. First, you'd have to consider us women. Realize our hearts beat under the bush. You'd have to think my heart longed like yours, and that my mind wasn't mindless, awash with nothing. I am a hot, quaking body, prime material subject. To you, I am only worth what can be gleaned. And you would have to know I meet the pain how your wife would. Imagine her, blushed pink frame, gap-legged, like a birth slick colt, quaking. But you cannot hold both of us in mind at once. My ability to bear is immeasurable. Pain discriminates. Material subject. To you, I am rabbit. So I didn't feel like I could write this book without considering my own experience as part of it, and also exposing my own experience as part of it. The mother of 3 daughters, and so part of my birth experience, and inevitably ended up in the book. This next poem I wrote for my mother, and I feel like this reading is like definitely an honor of woman. And so I wrote this poem. It's dedicated to her. The poem is called "My Mother Bathes Me After I Give Birth." My mother bathes me after I give birth, washing my collapsed belly, crossing the soapy cloth over my wilted shoulders and back is a familiar act for my mother. And washing her child is like riding a bike, a thing she will not forget. At first, I feel something as deep as shame, standing naked and framed by the backsplash of the shower, the remnants of the anesthesia clattering through me. I watch the blood pool between my feet before narrowing as it moves towards the drain. My shoulders can no longer support the weight of my mind. I can only look at the tiled shower floor and not at any part of my mother's face. My babies have been taken straight to the NICU for my body. I kissed unfeeling kisses on their lips and faces, and before the kisses dry, they are swaddled tight and wheeled away. I am bleeding from their exit, my incision numb, yet throbbing at the belly. The nurse has said to allow the water to soak the bandage, and it will fall off the incision. It does. While my mother soaps my arms, I wash between my legs with another cloth, astounded at the blood. I glance at my mother, what to do with the reddened cloth. She says, let it fall in the tub. Moments later, a heap of soaking cloths near the drain. My mother has asked for extra towels, warm towels, and she wraps them around me when I've stepped out of the shower. She dries me with the door shut to keep the heat in. When she moves the lotion over my skin with her hands, I breathe. I am an aching shell, but her touch says I am worth tenderness. And this last poem for men, I'm going to read one more poem after this one. This last poem for men, again, is written in one of the voices of the women. And it's called I've Got Life. I've got life. What I've got is cows and heels to carry me, and this heart that only God can stop. I've got these fingers to snap in time. I've got this behind for sitting, so I don't sit on my spine. I've got these shoulders only I can shrug, breasts that let down when I get the feeling, and a bird neck that carries my head and all my blood. These lips only move if I tell them to, if I want them to. There is so much my body can still do. Plus, I've got these eyes for watching you. So this last one is called Invisible Work, and it's from my current collection. And I wrote this poem, and the prompt for this poem was about work and about the importance of work, and particularly like, you know, blue collar work. And so I started thinking about work, and then I started done by women. But it's something that we all do, but more often than not done by women. And this poem is called Invisible Work. Invisible work, or teachers, guides whose gestures I recall better than names. So much I've been taught I have yet to know, but owed to every stitch of braid past my mother's fingertips, sewing countless buttons for every aching day my grandmother cooked and cleaned house twice. And Sister Eugenia Foster, who kept my brother and I in summer, taught me steeping and drinking tea, and how I could call for someone but not cry when they passed over. The wind chimes, too, all their constant worry with wind. Even after her stroke, my grandmother Dorothy rose on cold nights, pulled a heavy leg down the hall to cover me with a quilt her own grandmother quilted. On his days off, my father lacquered my found rocks, praised my keen eye. Wasn't he urging me to notice? I see now all this gracious lack of accounting, but maybe too how tonight in terrific storm, when the wind picked up and pitched warning, this primal lit body, startled, took off running, homing through the dark house towards the beds where my children sleep. Thank you. Thank you so much to Malcolm and Malvika for organizing this reading as well.
Thank you so much, Koya. It's always an honor to hear you read, and I'm really excited about the new projects whenever we can get that. And thank you to Malvika for dropping the links in the chat related to Dr. Sim's the statues. I think there is, you dropped one that was a petition in Alabama to remove that statue. So please do read up on that. Okay, so next we have Courtney Faye Taylor. Courtney and I met in graduate school, University of Michigan. It's also not an understatement to say like she's one of my favorite poets right now. Anytime somebody asks me who I'm reading, I tell them Courtney, but it's also such a tease because I have the manuscript and they don't. The manuscript that she'll read from today, I believe. But she's just one of those poets who I just go to learn from every time. And she asked me to read from the manuscript that she'll read from today, I think in the fall, or maybe last summer. I took so long getting back comments because I just kept rereading it for myself and to learn things. And every time I go back to it, I just find something new and different. And it's just really one of those projects that I'm really excited for people to read and engage with. I'm going to drop into the chat this is one of the first poems by Courtney that I read, and me and my friends still talk about this poem to this day, like when we talk about poetry and Courtney. And this was my roommate back when I was in Michigan, who's also not a poet, not a writer, but it's just a reader of poetry. And we also just talk about Courtney's work together. So really excited that she could join us and be with us today. Let's see, Courtney Faye Taylor is the winner of the 92Y Discovery Boston Review Poetry Prize and an Academy of American Poets Prize. Her work has been anthologized in several important anthologies and has appeared in several places, The Nation, Poetry Magazine, Gulf Coast. She is the poetry editor of Slice Magazine and a studio resident of the Charlotte Street Foundation in Kansas City. She is working on her first collection of poetry. Please welcome Courtney Faye Taylor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Malvika and Malcolm, for that great introduction. That's such an honor to hear that from you. And to all the beautiful poets that read before me, it's been so great to witness your work. So as Malcolm said, I'm going to be reading from a manuscript in progress. It's a collection about Latasha Harlins, and she was a 15-year-old Black girl living in South Central Los Angeles, and she was shot and killed in a convenience store owned by a Korean American woman named Suja Do. And it's thought that the LA uprising, also known as the LA riots of '92, were really sparked by Latasha's murder and the Rodney King beating. But in my collection, I'm kind of using Latasha and Suja's legacies as a way to explore unity and tension between Black and Korean American communities, specifically how white supremacy is complicit in that tension, and also exploring how Black and Asian women survive various forms of violence. And so this first poem, it opens at the scene of the crime in 1991. After Latasha is shot, the police arrive on the scene and they see that Suja's husband is slapping her. So their first task on arriving at this scene is to get him to stop. And this is called At the Scene, the Angels. At the scene, the Angels PD urged Mr. Du to, "Sir, lower your hand." During the death, Mr. Du was asleep in the family van. The bark of the shot, the snitch of surveillance, it conceives Ali butterfly bee under which Suja promptly dissolves. Knuckles were no foreign performance in their marriage. In mine, wife beaters yank back my wig caps all the time. Above each assault, white Jesus lit his Lucy and I became the cameraman involved. All I could think was Ellis the Island and Mamie the Mast, a ton in our shooting deaths. Blood orange and blood of baby girl whiffed up from the sill, both swearing in patois and smelling lilac good. But then Jesus ashed his cig and clocked out of his shift. He no longer needed women of color to make his point about obedience. He had mammograms and Florida Man for that. A city's #1 killer of people is people who are obedient to their senses. Sense outlawed. Now wouldn't that be trife? Jesus would need us so pathetically then. But in any life, it's never my business why the Savior is the color of a wedding dress and not tap shoes. I'll have my book of light and he'll have his. For killing anyone, he and mammograms have their lofty reasons and our men have theirs, tenderized as they are. But any afterlife, a paradise, is no killer of colored girls even when pushed. The skies of that sort of nirvana are innocent and inconsolable as we laze forward, inventing simultaneous gods to save us, ornery gods of pansex, midterm, safe medications. We create gods without penises, without which they are made only of air and belief, no punishment. This second poem kind of arises from some research I did where I discovered that Latasha's gravesite had been disturbed 4 years after her death. And it was disturbed by the cemetery because they were unearthing bodies and putting them in a mass grave to make room for more bodies in the cemetery. And this is called Latasha's Gravesite in Paradise. Latasha's gravesite in Paradise Memorial Park may have been disturbed in a slew of unearthings initiated by the cemetery proprietors in '95. If so, she was exhumed and flung onto a mound with other bone black remains. The location of the pile is unknown to me, though you know it's a way of reselling plots, of making space for the lucrative business of dying. You know cemeteries know better. You know where this cemetery stay. You got bones to suck the marrow out of when it comes to any paradise. Paradise shouldn't be the name of no cemetery. There are no cemeteries in Paradise, the novel. Men shiv women in a convent, and when it's time to pile the bodies, our bodies are nowhere to be disturbed, no air, no punishment, paradise. The next poem I'm going to share is a visual poem. and it is called Light Attire, and it is in the most recent issue of Poetry magazine. And so just a little background, this is kind of the epigraph that accompanies the poem in the publication. It's composed of descriptions and photographs of Black women and girls that I found on police missing persons flyers and the FBI's most wanted list. And so in this poem, I'm reflecting on the ways Black women and girls are neglected, reduced, and fused together by how they are defined on these flyers. And I think this collage attempts to tell a central story that all of these Black women and girls share. And that story is the narrative that's constructed by police in this country. So I'm not gonna read the poem because I haven't really found a way that I read it. I think every time I look at it, I kind of enter it at different points, but I think I just wanna talk about how I created it and some of the things I was thinking about. In the bottom right-hand corner, this was an excerpt that I got from one of the flyers that described the occupation or lifestyle of the Black woman in question. So we see here that she's defined as a sex worker, as a laborer in various aspects, and then finally a drug user. And so this woman is reduced to her utility and her quote unquote social transgressions. And it really shows how this medium, this missing or wanted persons flyer, isn't a medium that's meant to humanize us. We can move to the second page now. So these are the second and third pages. I also did erasures on some of the language that I found on the flyers. On the page on the left, at the very bottom, there is a phrase we have that says, "No clothing was found in the area, was last seen wearing light." And that final line was originally something like, "was last seen wearing light blue pants." But in this abbreviation, I was thinking about what it must be like to think back to that last moment you saw someone, not knowing that it would be the last time you saw them and that they would go missing. I think grief can make that last moment light up for us in many ways. And then the page on the right, this is the last page of the poem, and it's kind of like my plea for us to consider these missing women and consider them as women and as people. And we can go to the final page now. And this final page is, sorry, there's a siren. This final page is an erasure of that previous page, and it basically erases to "The Female Should Be Considered," which is the title of the final poem that I'll read today. I just want to give a trigger warning for mentions of sexual violence throughout. Okay, so I will read now, final poem. Thank you so much. The female should be considered. After Toyin, I called everyone with a difficult life in my life. Gaslight. Before 2016, I had not heard of it. Breakfast is severed. Sunny side up eggs, little water beds. Clover honey flooding up the forehead of a bear. Kettle finna cry while his piss rings porcelain behind the only door in our apartment. But after he hit me, doors between us were over. Should be considered that women's dreams continue to put a run in the tights of colonial rule. In war, these women are taken into theaters, tanks, and pueblos, and in these places they are harmed to harm their husbands. Women are a point that's made. My heart goes out to the place. Should be considered that Crystal Harlins, mother of Latasha Harlins, put a restraining order out on her man, but men don't rest. She and her baby share a cause of death. Thanksgiving Day, she's in the club, bluing her nails when his side chick walks in. The bouncer must have missed during his frisk of her purse, the steel cyst. Should be considered that Suja assembled couches to fund her husband's dream of convenience, that she did so while inhabiting a woman's place. Synced sheets, such flawless boxes in the armoire, 3 babies fed a tenuous milk, and all the days he wanted sex, he got sex all the days he wanted it. Should be considered that D. Millard invented the double eyelid surgery, rehearsing the trick on women like you. We are harmed. Should be considered that James Marion Sims invented the PAP, dismantling a cyst like explosives to soothe a husband. Should be considered that D. Millard invented the double eyelid surgery, that James Marion Sims invented the PAP, rehearsing the trick on women like you, dismantling a cyst like explosives. We are harmed to soothe a husband. Consider that now I'm in a nigga with no answers, disturbed. I cover my drink, fist my sob keys, check the backseat, a curriculum to groom the echoes. Downtown, my rape kit collector takes a sip of water, and so my whole world takes a sip of that water. Should be considered how war denotes 2 brotherhoods, how a hood unites some brothers, how one brother wished rape on the other, how the war will award both brothers. Consider we've been gaslit into forgiving this. Remember that our men were invented to scare and convince. This is true, regardless of the ship. But consider that our ancestors have incredible side eye, the talent of seeing things they are not directly looking at, an adaptation from lynchings, beatings, and other fearings. Consider they were convinced into colonies, corsets, boycotts, and jobs, and in these robberies were harmed to harm a concept. Consider that backhands in the homes of our descendants are statistically unlikely to lower. At the precinct, our pussies and eyelids give fingerprints, and Linnaeus takes a sip of gaslight. Consider that safety measures between us, like restraining orders and doors, were invented to convince, concentrate. We have decisions to make. Fire is that decision to make. Pain is a symptom of the aftermath. Pain only gonna happen if you survive, and fools survive. Please consider that I'm trying to survive, but men are invented and inventions don't rest. Men don't rest until terrible. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, Courtney. I also really appreciate you reading, talking about how you wrote the visual poem, because I think when I think about visual poetry, I assume I know how the poet got to that place, in addition to just not knowing how to read the poem. So that was, I think, really helpful. And then, of course, that last poem is just so rich. And thank you to all the poets who were here today and for agreeing to do this and for just being so generous and honest and also vulnerable. Like, writing like this is very, very vulnerable. So I do want to acknowledge that, and just for being so present in this space. Yeah, I think I told some of you this. I just came back from my friend's memorial in Kansas City. They passed away like a week ago, and they were queer Black person I met in graduate school, and going back home, going their like hometown and seeing how people talked about them was so different than how I knew this person and how their mother talked about their queerness, and just noting how it's easy for things to get erased. And I think especially going to a funeral for a queer person, I'm already prepared for certain narratives to be erased. But the way that his mother honored that was very powerful. And I just didn't have the words or language to process that in the moment. But I think being in this space and how you all have shared your process and just the subjects was really, really powerful. So thank you all for that. And just wanting to also thank Malvika for being so active in the chat with these links and news. That is amazing. I'm so impressed. But also I know you, so like I know you will do something like that. but really helpful. This is a very thoughtful space, just because of how Malvika and the Brooklyn Rail set it up. So I do just want to give extreme profound thanks for that as well. And then I'll hand it over to Malvika to do last things.
Malcolm's so sweet. This has been a beautiful space. Thank you so much, Koya. Thank you, Miss Easter. Thank you, Courtney, Yolanda, and of course, Malcolm. Thank you for bringing us all together and for sharing this just opening up the space, filling it with so many invocations. Just the beautiful and intimate way you've introduced all of these people you've known from all of these different facets of your life. Just really, really quickly, I want to say, Courtney, I'm so into that poem, especially Women's Dreams continue to put a run in the tights of colonialism, the side eye of ancestors, all of that. I feel like so much of the work today was so in conversation with one another and made me think so much about sort of Saidiya Hartman, critical fabulation, like pulling out of the archive what the archive would never have in it, and then putting it back out into the world so that we can imagine the realities that were, and then the realities that can be. I'm thinking about this also with Eliza Winston and all the scene with all her friends making her clothes. Thank you all so much. This has been incredible. As always, we'll share the video of the reading on our archives and on YouTube, so it'll be available to all if you would like to revisit this magical space at a later date. And please join us again tomorrow for On Music and Memory with Adele Bertai, Luc Sante, and Bob Holman. That will be, as always, at 1 p.m. right here in the Zoom, and I'll drop a little link in the chat. I've also dropped a little link to all of the beautiful collections and chapbooks that were mentioned. Other than that, thank you all so much. I'll invite you to turn on your microphones if you'd like to say hello to one another, or goodbye on your way out, or anything else that compels you, but this was incredible, and thank you. Hi, Doc.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Malcolm, that was
Thank
great.
you.
Malcolm,
Bye.
Terry,
Courtney.
Bye.
Thank you to all the poets.
Thank you, Koya.
You're
Yeah,
all,
so wonderful.
all
Thank
so
you.
good.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Thank you very much.
Great.
And thank you, Mary. Thank you,
To
Koya,
everyone.
so much for the beautiful reading. Thank you so much.